This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we'll be talking to New York Times bestselling author Karen Robards about her new release, Some Murders in Berlin. Welcome, Karen.
Oh, thank you. I am so glad to be here. I'm
I am
excited to talk to you.
I am so excited that you're here today. This book had me absolutely reeling from start to finish. The
Thank
plot was so
you.
amazing. I can't wait to jump in. But before we do, would you mind giving those who haven't heard about Some Murders in Berlin, giving them an overview of the story?
Okay. Well, Some Murders in Berlin is about some murders in Berlin. You can get by that from the title. In 1943, World War II was going very badly for the Nazis, and the high command was starting to panic. And in Berlin, there was a great deal of upheaval because the Allied bombers had made it to Berlin when they thought they never could. They thought the Allied bombers could never reach in as far as Berlin. So they were bombing the heck out of Berlin, and they instituted a citywide blackout. Now, in this blackout, all kinds of things happened. There were all kinds of crimes, but there was a serial killer, and there really was a serial killer. This is true. There was a serial killer who was stalking the women of Berlin, and they had to work in the factories because the men were off to war. And so at night they had a shift, and they'd come home 11 p.m., midnight, in the dark, the pitch dark. There were no lights. It was pitch dark. So the serial killer could pick them off at will as they were moving around in the dark. And he did. 8 young women were murdered. And the Kripo detective in charge of the case, that's the homicide division of the Nazi police force, they couldn't catch him. They were trying. They had a little squad. But the thing was, they couldn't have any publicity because Hitler was involved. The whole high command was involved. And they didn't want the word to get out because the people would think that they were incompetent. And because the women wouldn't go to work, they'd panic and it would be bad for morale. So they summoned a woman, a Dr. Elin Lund from Copenhagen, from Denmark, which the Nazis had just taken over. It had been a protectorate, but they had taken over the whole country like the week before. And she had no choice but to come. I mean, if the Nazis say, you come to Berlin, well, then you come to Berlin. So she got to Berlin, and they paired her with Detective Kurt Schneider. And he wasn't real appreciative of her help, and she didn't want to be in Berlin for a variety of reasons. But both of their lives were on the line if they did not find this killer and solve the murder without attracting any publicity to the case. So they were off on the hunt. And I'm not going to tell you a lot because it's spoilers, but they both have big secrets. And those big secrets are enough to get both of them, either of them, killed. And so they are hunting the serial killer. And I really enjoyed writing the book. It was a good book.
I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Thank you so much for writing this book.
Oh, I love the book. I love the characters. I had a good time. Well, I had a good time when I was finished. While I was writing it, you know how you are when you write a book. Oh my God.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about. First of all, let's start with your title. It is phenomenal. Some Murders in Berlin, Understated Elegance. Some Murders in Berlin in 1972 is one thing. Some Murders in Berlin in 1943 is a whole nother issue. And to think about what's happening, to certain groups, to a lot of groups. Obviously, there's inklings of what's happening with the concentration camps, and word is starting to get out about what they're doing there. The peril that you created for Elin going there.
There was so much peril for Elin. Elin had so many secrets, and I hate to give them out, but Elin was at risk from the serial killer. She was at risk from the German hierarchy. She was going to die if she didn't get this done and get it home in a timely fashion. And not just herself, her family. She had to find this killer who was trying to find her at the same time.
And that was one of the interesting things, those layers of peril. Um, Thinking about anytime you write a thriller, right? There's
Yeah.
usually the villain and there's the protagonist. Here, there's multiple layers of villainy. And talking about the secrets that people had to keep. If you're keeping a secret today, it could be a very juicy, bad secret, and bad things can happen to you. The type of secrecy that was required in 1943 Berlin is a whole nother animal, because the slightest facial expression could betray something absolutely key. Um, what did you, I mean, you played out the suspense so brilliantly on every
Thank you.
single secret. How did you do that? How did you craft all those layers of suspense all at once? Because, as you said, so many perils she's facing. And one of them is, oh, there's Allied bombers that can show up at any time.
That
And,
was the least of her problems.
and that's sad when that's the least of your
Yeah,
problems.
when that's the least of your problems, you got some problems. I made this character. And then you have to ask yourself, what puts her most at risk? I mean, her primary goal was to come in and find the killer. And that's risky enough. But what would put her more at risk from the environment that she was in? I mean, World War II was going on. The Nazi atrocities were going on. All these people were being killed just for being Jewish or being gay or being whatever the Nazis didn't like. I mean, you're dead. And she had to navigate through that. Plus, Kurt, Detective Schneider, had secrets of his own, and he didn't want her involved in the case. So she had to sort of negotiate a relationship with him, which I really enjoyed the relationship between them, which developed into something more. But it was all, everything she did, she had to do to survive and get back to her son and her family. She's a widow. Uh, Her husband was killed in the initial invasion of Copenhagen. He was one of the people who resisted, and he was killed. So she's a widow with a young son when she goes to Berlin, and she cannot take her son with her. So he's back home with the in-laws, and she's fighting for her life and his. I really loved her, really.
I absolutely adored her. She is strong. She is brilliant. She has been forged in fire.
She was forged in fire. She has so many secrets, but she's a good person, and she has lived her life the best way she can.
And what's interesting, this was something I wanted to touch on with you about the novel. I can't imagine, they always say that good writing comes from empathy on the author's part. I cannot imagine how much it took from you personally to write some of these scenes, not to mention how much time was clearly devoted to research. You just beautifully inserted every fact seamlessly as if we were right there going through this horrible time in history. But what was it like to write something where it's not just what your protagonist is going through, it's what the world is going through. It's these things that the earth had never seen on this scale of evil.
It's dark. I mean, the problem with me, I can't speak for all writers, but once you start a book like this, it takes a year probably for these type of fiction, because my stuff is accurate. I can't stand it. I must be OCD or something. Every fact has to check. I go through it, and the stuff you read in there is real. So you go into a sort of a dark place, and it takes over your mind. And of course, I have 3 grown sons. Luckily, they're grown now. But you come out for the children. But basically, you live in Elin's world, which is a dark and dangerous place where you can trust no one. And it just kind of takes over your life for the length of time that you're writing a book. And the way I do it is I get inside my protagonist's head and I try to see the world through her eyes, and you try to experience what she's experiencing and feel what she's feeling so that you can describe it for the reader. And you can go down some holes with that, although it's fun.
Well, that's why I think you were incredibly brave with this story, because so much of what you're telling us, you're telling us this beautiful story about this woman who's faced with some of the world's hardest circumstances that you could imagine. And she's still a woman in 1943. So there's all of that baked into this cake. But there is so much darkness around it. And the fact that you were able to not just get into her head so well, but into her heart and into the hearts of so many of the ancillary characters that we look at and we think, because is everybody listening? Are they going to turn you in? Are they going to misinterpret something or actually hear something you said? And I mean, living with that level of suspicion and constantly having your nerves stretched so taut, it was just amazing how well you did that.
Well, here's one of the interesting things. As I said, I do research. I have read so many books on World War II now that it's not funny. But anyway, do you remember the scene, Kurt in his office? Kurt is the homicide detective, the lead homicide detective. He has a box filled with cotton over his telephone because he's afraid that somebody higher up will listen into his conversations in his office. Well, that's true. They did. That's exactly what they did, because the Nazis were always listening. You could not say one word anywhere without being afraid somebody picking up. They tapped the phones. But I got that. I was reading a true story about a crypto detective. I forget where I got it. But that's what they do. They'd take a box, they'd stuff it with cotton, and they'd put it over their phone so that they couldn't be listened in on, which I thought was really interesting.
And the other technique of offering to give you a driver when you go somewhere, because the driver's listening, right?
And watching and reporting. You had no expectation of privacy whatsoever. And what they saw could kill you. What they saw or overheard, if it gets reported, you're gone.
And part of that, I think, one of the things I thought was very interesting, you used a lot of visual pieces to really ratchet up that suspense and give that sense of foreboding, and really to just play on the heartstrings. And two of the things I remember you mentioning a lot was uniforms, and who was dressed in a uniform and how their uniform looked. And the other thing was, you did mention the eagle that was used as a symbol of the Third Reich. And I was just curious, how intentional was that for you? Because for me as a reader, it was so incredibly powerful what it meant when Elin is dealing with one of these people with one of those uniforms on versus someone who wasn't wearing one of those uniforms.
The uniforms were a symbol of their power and authority. The eagles, and I have pictures of people's offices is where I got all that stuff. But anyway, the eagles, that was a symbol of the Nazi supreme authority. And they were proud of their uniforms, and they used them to intimidate people. And people were intimidated. If you saw one of these guys coming in their uniform, you backed up, backed off, or shut up. You didn't want to mess with them because they had the power to throw you in prison, to have you tortured, to have you killed, to have your whole family picked up. You did not mess with them. It was a symbol of authority. And so I put it in there intentionally because they used them intentionally.
One of the other things that I love about Elin, not only is she forged in fire, she's an incredibly smart woman. And she's using and spearheading a lot of techniques that it's going to take us in the US a lot longer to get to, right?
I have a book on forensics in World War II. I went through that book. I couldn't stand it, because their techniques were so different, and I had to write them. So I wanted to get as accurate as I could get. They did do fingerprinting, but of course they didn't have DNA. They did do blood typing, but they could not match the blood any further than that, just to a general blood type group. So the things that she did are accurate. but it was a lot of, I'm looking for the book. It's somewhere around here, but I got a book from a forensic scientist who wrote it during World War II. So it's contemporaneous with the book. And that's where I got the details.
It was phenomenal. And I actually was going back and learning where a lot of this, like even the term psychopath is coined before 1943. And I didn't realize it went back that far. And just like I said, everything you went through was so phenomenal. And the way she uses all of that technology and science that's available for her at the time and puts it together, absolutely brilliant. And as a puzzle solver, I loved it.
Thank you. I tell you, I appreciate that. I worked hard on that book. Again, I think I'm compulsive or something. I write, and I've been writing a long time, but I have found that if I can't get something right, I get stuck. I can't move forward until I find the information I need. And so, that particular book with the forensics, people didn't even know there were serial killers back then. But yeah, the term was used and there they were. In fact, there were serial killers way before that. But you have to do the research.
You have to do the research. And I think here in the US, we think, well, forensic profiling doesn't start really until the 1980s, right?
Yeah,
when the FBI creates a bureau for it, right? And so we forget, I think we become myopic here in the US, and we forget other things are going on all around the world.
Oh,
and
always. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it was so fun to read that and to understand just where the roots are for this and what was being used. We talked about secrecy. One of the toughest things for Elin and for anyone who would be living anywhere really in Nazi-occupied Europe at that time is trust. And usually when teams work together in law enforcement, there has to be some level of trust. Who can Elin trust, and how did you come at that element of trust in trying to forge a team that was working together?
Elin couldn't trust anybody except she brought Pia. She brought two people with her. She brought Pia and Jens. They were her co-workers at the University of Copenhagen, and they were also involved in the Danish resistance, and they had to flee Copenhagen because they were searching for them. So she brought them with her as her team. She could trust them. She could not trust anyone else. Kurt and she did not trust each other at all at first, but she discovered a secret about him. And when she discovered that secret about him, she was able to lower her guard a little bit. But the biggest secret in her life, she wasn't able to disclose until almost the very end, because it would not only get her killed, it would get her family killed. So she had this deep secret that she had to keep. And he had a deep secret that he had to keep. I mean, that they were both so wrapped up in trying to survive and trying to get back to a place where they could live their lives that they came together very slowly as a matter of being able to trust each other. I mean, it was like peeling an onion. One little fact would come out for her, one little fact would come out for him. But he broke first. So, I mean, once she saw that he had these vulnerabilities, she could share hers a little bit. And then in the end, everything had to come out.
And it always does.
Yeah.
But the problem is in Nazi Germany,
well, they had to run. They could not stay. They would have been killed.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, all of us believe that we have kind of a moral compass and a set of morals and values to the way that we live our lives. And as I was reading this book, it really challenged me as a human being, because when you look at people who are living through these extreme circumstances, they're constantly confronted with a series of horrible choices.
Yep.
And sometimes people rise up and say, well, you know what these people are doing is wrong, so I am willing to lay down my life to stop them. And most of us look at that and say, oh my God, that's wonderful. That's what you should do. If something's extremely bad, then you have to face it in whatever way and give everything. But one of the things that you had us consider was, when you do that, that is a choice you are making. But what are the implications for your children, your wife, your family after that?
Exactly.
And how hard was that to come to? And really, because for the reader, you can't read this book without looking at yourself and saying, well, I believe all these great things and I sit in judgment on all the bad stuff. But then it becomes, well, would I stand up and give my life? And if I did, would I be prepared for what it would cost my family and what it would cost my friends? And am I willing to maybe let go of my friends if I absolutely had to save my child? And you're just set in these one horrible choice after another. And all of those values and morals and everything that we believe in starts to get, it starts to come like a noose around your neck. And how hard was that to write? And how hard was it to confront for yourself, let alone to get the reader to confront it?
It was hard. What I did is I have 3 boys, and there's not much I wouldn't do for my sons. So I'd like to think I would make the good and moral choice, but if it was going to cost my sons their lives, no, I would not make that good and moral choice. I would do what I had to do to protect them. I mean, when it's just you, it's one thing. But when you have a family, when you have children, you do what you have to do to survive to a certain point. I mean, I don't think there are some things that I would not do, but in most cases, you would choose to be silent. You would choose to be careful. You would choose to keep secrets. You would be very, very careful, because it's not just you. It's your kids. It's your family. It's your whole circle. So I put myself in that position, and I tried to ask myself what I would do. And what I ended up coming up with is, I wasn't quite as good a person as I thought I was, because I would choose my children first. And she did too. But not to the point of doing something really hideous, I hope. I don't know. Maybe so. Who knows? Let's hope we never have to find out for real.
Exactly. But the fact that through art, you were able to get us to think about, what if we had lived in that world? But for the grace of God, we weren't born in that time.
But for the grace of God. Exactly.
Right? So, it really teaches you that to some degree, morals and values and judgment are a blessing for the fortunate, because we can sit back in our world where we don't ever have to test them. And it really shows you the nature of evil, because
that's what it is, the nature of evil.
The type of evil that would push people over and over and over again to break those norms and to break what they believe in, and break really the hope of what gets us all to wake up in the morning and believe, right?
Right.
Absolutely powerful book. I can't thank you enough for writing something like this.
Thank you for your kind words. I'm so glad you liked it.
I did. Now, for folks, know everybody knows your name, Karen, but for those
I doubt it, but go ahead. Nice to hear.
Well, for those of you that don't, and for those that are going to be absolutely ecstatic to discover your work, as well as those who have loved your work for a long time, where is the best place that people can find you?
Oh, you can find me all over the place. Just Google me. But I am on Facebook every day, author Karen Robards. And if it's not author Karen Robards, it isn't me. There are a couple other Karen Robards. I'm on Twitter, the Karen Robards, which I think is hilarious, because there was another Karen Robards. I'm on Instagram, author Karen Robards. And guess I'm going to be on TikTok soon.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Oh, yes. Again, I have 3 sons. They are pushing me. Like, Mom, you got to be on TikTok. You talking about the clock? What do you want me to do here? No, TikTok. Okay. So I guess that's where I'm going.
Well,
very soon.
I am sure everybody will be excited to find you there and have that new way to communicate with you. Karen, I said I would only keep you here a short while, but I do have one little more question.
Sure.
What do you do for fun? Because between all that research and all this wonderful writing, how do you break it up? Where do you go to find the hope and renewal in yourself when you're writing such powerful work?
Well, here's the thing. I have this whole family. I have three sons, so I'm always involved in their activities. I have a mother, a sister, two surviving brothers. I have things going on at all times. And I think that shows through in my work because if you read any of my books, there's this poor woman about to be murdered and her kid's got to go and do his homework and her mother's got to go to the doctor and this and that keeps happening because that's my life and that's what I put into the books. I have a perfectly normal life, but I am not chasing serial killers or killing people. Really. I mean, the cat swallowed the needle yesterday. That is a perfectly normal life. So that's what I do for fun. I have a normal life.
But the wonderful news is that the cat was saved.
There is a book called Save the Cat.
Yes.
Yes. Well,
yes.
We saved the cat yesterday.
You saved the cat. They might have to write a second in the series based on this absolutely tumultuous day you had yesterday.
Oh, yes. Well, you know what? Isn't your life that way? That's kind of par for the course. And that's good. It lightens things.
It does. And that realness and that sincerity shows through so beautifully in your work.
Well, thank you. I mean, as I said, I put myself in the protagonist so they have a real life too.
Well, that's what makes it real and that's what makes it fun. Karen, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just getting your book cover ready. Again, it's Some Murders in Berlin.
Look at that. We have matching books.
We do. I've got the e-version. You've got the
beautiful
hardback. Whatever way that people choose to go out and get it, they will not be disappointed. This book is revelatory. It is exploratory. It is everything that you're looking for in the written word. Thank you again, Karen, so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. You have been so kind about the book and about everything. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you too. It's writers like you that make all the rest of the readers in the world happy little clams and get us, something to look forward to when we're in those hard times, something we can relate to and something we can believe in. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
And thank you all for joining me on this episode of Twisted Passages. I hope to see you next time.